So bonsoir.
Tout le monde.
Tout le monde. Bonsoir. I did that with Martin Walker the other day, but it was afternoon. I had to remember bon après-midi as opposed to bonjour.
Bonjour. Bonjour covers everything, I think.
And, you know, I've just learned, pardon us while we geek in French here, that bonne journée means have a good day as opposed to bonjour, which is like good morning.
Yeah.
And recently in watching a whole bunch of French television on MHC TV and Netflix and stuff, they say si instead of we now a tremendous amount of time. So every once in a while I think I'm really listening to Spanish.
I was always taught that si is the we when you're contradicting somebody.
Really?
Yes. But that was 250 years ago when I was in school, so
well,
who knows if
yeah, it was about that long when I was a French major, so I'll try to keep it in mind. I tried to dredge out my Stanford Russian for an event with an author who'd written a Russian novel last week, and I could only get to Dobrý den, good day, Dobrý večer, good evening, do svidaniya, how are you, and ja ničego ne poнимаю, which means I don't understand a word you're saying, which turned out to be the most useful of the phrases. She said to me later that she was terrified I was going to make her do the whole event in Russian.
Oh.
But I said to her, you would have lost me, you know, so there she was. Anyway, we are here to talk about Mark's first hardcover book. So yay, whoop,
yes.
I slide it away. Congratulations. That's so exciting.
It is. And in fact, I had not seen it because normally, you know, they send publishers send you a box of books, and I hadn't, and they arrived today. So the first time I saw my first hardcover book was in
our back
in your store, yeah.
Right. Well, this is the start of a series with Inspector Henri Lefort. Can we call him Henri and not Henry? I've got to do something.
Yes, Henri, definitely.
And it is the start of a series. So we're in occupied Paris, 1940.
Correct.
When did the Germans actually storm in and occupy the city? It wasn't a lot earlier.
No, it was actually about a week before the book starts.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. And it wasn't so much storm as stroll.
Yes, the Maginot Line let them down, didn't it?
Yeah, it was not a stout defense, which I'm actually grateful for.
Well, it probably kept Paris from being blown up.
Exactly.
And one of the few good things that happened towards the end of the war, from the Allied perspective, is that the Nazi who was charged with blowing up Paris as they left didn't do it. He refused. And, you know, I've always thought how incredibly lucky that was.
Right, yeah.
Could have been any other guy, you know, would have just blown it to bits.
Yeah. So now we have Paris.
Now we have Paris, right, which actually had undergone quite a transformation in the middle of the 19th century when Baron Haussmann was charged with getting rid of much of medieval Paris under Louis Napoleon and creating the big boulevards and the things that we know today and which are landmarks in your book, like the Café, was it
the Deux Magots?
Yeah, the Deux Magots.
Yeah.
Would not have existed, right? Before its opportunity. What is it on the Champs-Élysées or what?
No, it's on the Boulevard Saint-Germain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So you've been to Paris a lot, or you couldn't have written the Hugo Marston series.
Yeah.
But to go back to 1940, did you have to do some work to see what in fact was standing then that might not be standing now?
To some degree, yes. I tried to put stuff in the book that I'm fairly certain was around then. I did a lot of reading as well, obviously, to catch up and see how things changed when the Germans moved in. I'd always been interested in that period, but didn't know much about the specifics. I mean, there's little tidbits in the book that make sense and are really funny and kind of sad. Like one point I have the lampposts are wrapped in padding. And they did that because they turned off all the lights, right? It had to be dark in case of bombs. But people kept walking, running, crashing into the lampposts. Yeah. So they ended up wrapping them to make them soft when people crashed into them.
I love that. What did they do with the outdoor pissoir? Did they wrap them?
Yeah,
you know,
I don't know.
It's still actually sort of a feature of Paris, but you know, they have a whole series of outdoor outhouses in the middle of some of the nice places, generally round and made out of metal.
Yeah.
Only for men?
Yeah.
That's right. Hence pissoir. Right.
I've never used one, and Trust I never shall.
I never have, but I mean, they were kind of like the red telephone boxes, but I think they're,
Yeah.
but it just occurred to me that if lampposts were an obstacle, peace wire might have been worse.
I'll feature that in the next book.
You could do that. That's why you come here, so I can tell
I know, right?
really cool things. Well, I brought this up because when Dan Brown wrote the Da Vinci Code, he was criticized by having used Google Maps for a lot of his research into Paris. And what he didn't allow for was the three-dimensional aspect. So while he might have had the street right or the building right, what is wrong is that you couldn't see over some of the structures to the other side. And so it was clear that he had not actually done on-the-ground research.
Yeah, I'm sort of torn on that because on the one hand, you want to get the major things right. You don't want to put the Eiffel Tower in Berlin or a silencer on a revolver, gun stuff, right?
Guns are really hard, yes.
But so for example, my first book, The Bookseller, I have a scene where the main character eats a strawberry dessert in the Pyrenees in its winter. And I got an email from a reader saying, love the book, but just telling it that you can't get strawberries in the Pyrenees in winter. So I phoned my mum, who at the time lived in the Pyrenees, in that very village, and I said, can you get strawberries there in the winter? And she's like, yeah, but I think it would be cheaper for you to buy them there. I was like, no. I said, no. Can you get them? And she's like, yeah, it's not 1800s. They're just more expensive.
Right. It's like going to Costco for blueberries in January or,
yeah,
I mean, there's almost no food that you can't get. But if it's not in season and local, it's not going to be
it's as good. And
right.
Yeah. But it had me thinking, like, so this person, she was wrong, and I pointed it out very gently, can suspend disbelief that all of these human beings that don't exist, and do all these awful things to other people that aren't real, and
then balk at strawberries.
Yeah. And then the hill I'm dying on is strawberries. Well, so I've become a lot less anxious about that.
Yeah.
Because there are going to be mistakes. Human beings writing books are going to make mistakes. And if it kills it for you, I'm really sorry. But
strangely enough, the thing that elicits the most rage is not if you kill people. You can slaughter people. But if you kill a dog and less outrage a cat, it really evokes rage in the reader.
One of the first lessons I was told by more experienced writers:
don't kill
a baby, but don't kill a dog.
I actually had a really good talk with Martin Walker, who writes a wonderful French series with Bruno, chief of police, set in Le Périgord, and I think they're fabulous books. But he had a basset hound, and as the books were moving along, Gigi, the basset hound, was getting older. And Martin had to make a decision because he was writing in real time. Is he going to have the dog put down? Is it going to, die of old age? Or, he said, I could give it a heroic death, saving its master. And he did that, and he got away with Gigi's death because...
It was heroic.
Yeah, because Gigi really did, I can't remember all of the details, but anyway, took a bullet or whatever it was for Bruno.
I can see that being a risk, though.
Yeah, no, he thought about it a long time. We've talked about it. We Zoomed last week and talked about it. And then he brought in a new basset hound, and the new basset hound has now courted and had sex with a lady basset hound, and now they're puppies. So he's kind of resolved the whole problem and just go rolling on.
Made up for the death with
basset
mass
hounds.
creation. Good.
We will do that. Balzac is the new basset hound.
Oh, yeah, Balzac.
Yeah, which I love. Anyway, let's go back to here and let's talk about Inspector Henri Lefort. And may I say to you that I was somewhat, and don't take offense at this, well, you can if you want, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Tell me what to do.
I was somewhat put out by, he didn't seem quite French. So I was pleased to get to the end and discover that my intuition that he wasn't quite French was actually correct. And at that point, I gave, but I really had to think about it. He just doesn't sound French when he's talking in the early parts of the book, not entirely. And you're so good with Hugo and all the other people. So
Turns out I'm good with Henri too.
You are. You really
Yeah.
are. But did you put that in deliberately as part of the fair play aspect of writing
Yeah,
mystery?
I tried to because it's quite a big twist about him, and if it's too big, then it becomes unbelievable.
Yep.
And so there is some of the way he talks, some of his attitudes, and some other people pick up on elements too. Yeah, it is part of the fair play thing. Like,
Well, you're so good suppressing being British when you're writing Hugo. I love Mark, who's British and, he's a federal prosecutor in Texas. And he writes a French series.
I'm a criminal defense attorney now.
Are you now?
Yeah.
You made the switch.
I made the switch.
We did talk about it.
Yeah, just a few months ago.
Wow.
Yeah. It's been,
Well, we talk later about at dinner about what kind of cases we're going to be defending. Then, wow.
we have the most high-profile murder case in America.
Which one?
It's the cyclist who was shot and killed in Austin.
Oh, right.
We're
Are you on
defending-
the defense team?
Mhm. Yep.
Awesome. I assume being a prosecutor really prepares you for being a
Yes. it
killer
does.
defense attorney,
It does, yeah.
as opposed to
Pun intended.
yes,
Yeah, no, it's been an interesting transition.
yeah, I'll bet.
And after 15 years prosecuting, I suddenly realized how little I know. I mean,
This is so interesting because this is the opposite of the Lincoln lawyer. Remember when Michael had him as a defense attorney all along, and then he, as a favor to Harry Bosch, his brother, stepped over into the prosecutor's role. I absolutely hated it and went back to being a defense attorney.
I enjoyed being a prosecutor, but I got to the point where I was just kind of cruising along.
Yeah.
I wasn't really being challenged. I didn't feel like I was doing good things for good people. I mean, not that they are bad people. It just wasn't. I was in a rut. And then I had these two friends who were former prosecutors, real smart people.
Decided to form their own firm and
They had
invited you in?
they had formed it about 2 or 3 years ago,
Okay.
and they'd been bugging me for about a year to join, and then finally pulled the trigger and did it. And I'm super glad that I did. Super glad.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So if we go back into Hugo Marston, how many of you remember The French Widow? Okay. So there was a fair amount of history in The French Widow, right? And there was some World War II history in The French Widow. And you have talked to me for several years about this idea you had for this book.
Yeah.
And it was a question of figuring out, finishing it up and finding a publisher for it.
Yeah.
But I sort of felt now that The French Widow was in part prepped for writing this story. Is that true?
That's really interesting, actually. I hadn't thought about that. The World War II does pop up in the bookseller.
Yep.
Obviously, The French Widow, maybe to some degree in other books. I guess it's always been an interest.
Wasn't the Paris Librarian? There was some history, a lot of history in the Paris Librarian.
Yeah, and The Crypt Thief too, with the the tunnels. So I guess it's always something I wanted to do, and just was always like busy with work, busy with the Hugo series, but then I didn't have any new contracts on that, so I'm like, let me finally do this thing. And luckily did it right before COVID, because during COVID, like many people, I just had kind of paralysis when it came to writing. I just couldn't do it. But I had this book written, and I gave it to my agent, and she's like, it's really, really good, but it could be better. Do some stuff to it. So I was able to do the stuff to it.
Great.
Originally, it was two basically parallel timelines, like back and forth, World War I and World War II. It's much, I think, better integrated now.
I do too.
And that was thanks to Anne. Thank you, Anne, if you're watching. And so during that bad year of COVID is when we were shopping that, and but World War II has always been like Philip Kerr's books.
We miss him. But my point was that you were not inexperienced in writing historical fiction, but you always had it married to contemporary fiction. So this one, however, really is historical fiction. I had a depressing realization as I was finishing Laurie King's new book, Back to the Garden, which is just amazing, which is set in the 1970s, that it's actually history now. It's 50 years ago. When I opened the store in 1989, World War II was 50 years ago.
Oh, wow. Oh,
And
my
it
goodness.
was, people were just beginning to write about the 1920s and the 1930s. I mean, where do you draw the line in historical fiction is the question. So I've decided with Laurie's book, because the line, maybe the 50s haven't had much play because they're not really as interesting as World War II, and then we kind of leap, forward into Vietnam War literature,
Right.
and then into the 70s. The
Right.
50s don't get a lot of attention. Um, Maybe because the Cold War was just so sort of paralytic and just two poles, and we were all worried about, as we are again.
Seems like it would be pretty fertile ground for spy stories and stuff, but not so much.
Well, there are some,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's just kind of a, it's true in English historical fiction. The one thing nobody ever wants to write about is the English Civil War and the Reformation. And having said that, Minette Walters just wrote an amazing book about the English Civil War, the only one I've ever read that I like.
Huh.
So they're orphan periods.
Orphan periods. I like
There
that.
are. There really are.
Maybe I'll write a spy story set in the 50s.
Stick to this. All right. So this opens up with Henri, who has desperately wanted to be part of the murder squad. It's July 5th. Oh, it's the day after Le 14 Juillet. Wow, July 15th.
There you go.
The day after the French national holiday, after Bastille Day. And he is called to a townhouse where a robbery is going down.
Yes.
And things happen. But tell us about Princess Marie Bonaparte.
Yeah. So
Great character, by
thank
the
you.
way. She's terrific.
That was pretty fortuitous. So I wanted to put real people in the book, real historical figures, and have them do interesting things and be interesting people. And one thing I discovered reading about history, and then trying to plan the book, it's really, really hard in historical fiction to have strong, powerful women in positions where they can do stuff. Because you think about all the detectives were men, so all their bosses were men. Like everybody's men.
Unless you're Catherine the Great or Elizabeth the First
exactly.
Or
But
somebody.
for this kind of book, that's not going to work. And then so I was just kind of researching about the period, and I read about this person called Princess Marie Bonaparte, who is the great niece of the little emperor himself, and ended up buying a book of her biography about her. She was an incredibly strong, intelligent woman. Not a great childhood, but came from loads of money. Always wanted to do her own thing. She was married, but they didn't really
Get along.
Yeah, and she never had any kids. But she was really into psychology, and she ended up being a friend of Einstein's. Not Einstein.
No, Freud.
Freud. Different hairstyle. And actually, she was the one who helped him escape from Austria, from the Nazis. But she lived in Paris, and she just seemed like a really compelling, strong woman for that time. She did have some privilege, right? She had the money. But I just thought, wow, what a great character. And so I just started to put her in the book, and then she just kept
taking over.
Popping back up. And like when, I had the robbery at her house, and that's where she meets Henri. And then when my agent's like, oh, you need to, tease out the backstory in a different way, I'm like, psychoanalyst, perfect. And so she sits down with Henri. He doesn't want to do it, but she gives him very expensive wine, which is hard to get in 1940.
Oh, it's Petrus. God,
Chateau
my heart
Petrus.
broke.
Mhm.
I've only drunk Chateau Petrus like once in my life.
I know. So yeah, right. So you would sit down for psychoanalysis if someone gave you a glass of that, and so his story sort of unfolds through her, and she's a no nonsense, and she's big inside. Just turned in the second book, I guess, just 6 months ago, and I'm supposed to be editing it. I've got till the end of the month.
Oh, that's a piece of cake.
Yeah,
An experienced lawyer like
exactly.
you, no problem.
But she's a major character in the second book,
Oh,
and
good.
as far as I can tell, will continue to be through the
So
series.
even though she's kind of almost like a visible hostage kind of person for the Germans, they left her alone to live in her beautiful townhouse.
Yeah.
Wow. I worried about her, because I thought she
For
was going
now.
to be an absolute target
For now,
for now.
we'll see.
That's right. You've
Anything-
got a long way to go
We
to
do. We've got a long way to go.
1945.
Right.
Very true.
You're giving me more ideas.
She really is a wonderful person, and you're right. It's a great narrative device. But what she lives in is a house that's filled with beautiful antiques and beautiful art. So there's a burglary going on.
Yes.
And the question would be then, is it a random burglary, or somebody had inside knowledge, or why are these things being stolen? And then it's in the first chapter, so we can certainly say
Well,
one of the burglars.
one of the burglars kills somebody. Is that what you're getting at?
Mm.
Yeah, kills a detective.
Well, we have to have a murder, or, you know, come on.
Although, yeah, I mean, that's sort of the catalyst to the story. And Henri basically kills the burglar and saves her. So she's kind of indebted to him.
Well, Henri has arrived as part of the robbery team, and his goal is to be, you know, in the murder squad. And if it weren't for this sequence of events, he would not then be promoted, because one of the two murder squad guys is killed by the robber. So that leaves a vacancy.
He creates his own vacancy, doesn't he?
Well, not intentionally,
Right.
but I mean, you did have to have some way to move him, because promotion into the, I mean, we know this from reading about the LAPD, right? Robbery homicide at the LAPD is like the elite unit.
Yeah.
And you're setting that up to be the case in Paris. So Henri has to have a reason to jump from the robbery squad to the murder squad and investigate this case, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Actually, one of the interesting questions about wartime occupied cities, there's a wonderful book called Blackout, set in London, is who's doing the policing? If all the men are off fighting. It happened in Detroit, too. I think either Lauren Estelman or Elmore Leonard wrote a really terrific book about the same problem in Detroit. Who's left to be the who are the fire guys? Who are the serving policemen if everybody's off in the army?
Yeah.
And how does the civilian population treat those guys who, in some cases, especially in your home country, were often treated with somewhat disdain, as though they were too cowardly to go fight?
Yeah. Well, and in the Paris situation is even more interesting than that, because not only were the soldiers off fighting, but there was a mass exodus of the city.
Right.
As the Germans were moving in, like how many hundreds of thousands of people headed south?
Well, they wanted to cross over into Vichy France.
Yeah, yeah, they wanted to get out of the way, and so that's police also left. I mean,
So there aren't a lot of people left to run the infrastructure of the city.
Right, and even though a lot of people came back, I think there was a lot of suspicion against those people who had left. Like, oh, okay, now it's safe, you're coming back, you know, why should we trust you? And so that you could imagine that would extend even more to the police. Like a policeman who flees to save his own life and then sort of slinks back once it's safe.
This is so Josh Hawley. Think about it. Any of you watch the video, of after he was out there pumping his fist and urging them? There's a hilarious video of him running, just sprinting away from all of them into the safety of, the Secret Service.
Yeah, that's classic.
No kidding. It really is. But you're right. You have to be suspicious. But they left Paris, the Jews left Paris for obvious reasons.
Right.
But some of the people who left Paris were afraid there'd be fighting in Paris. And then when the city is occupied but not destroyed, and there's not like street combat and all, some of them came back. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just normal citizens. Their families would pack up. They were afraid of, that there would be fighting, there would be bombing. And so they just headed south. And, I read stories of literally there was, and I think I may put it in the book, where this family drove south and one of the elderly members died, and they didn't know what to do, so they put her on the roof of the car and covered her with a mattress. And then I think got into a car accident, and then I mean, it's kind of comic, but also
They
kind of
didn't
sad.
have any ice.
Right, yeah, what are you going to do? What do you do with Granny when she dies on this trek towards the Pyrenees? I mean, it was terrible. But then, once it was clear that there wasn't going to be fighting, a lot of these people came back. And I think a lot of people who had stayed kind of resented that.
Okay, so let's switch from Princess Marie's townhouse filled with art treasures, not all of which are stolen, to the Louvre. Because in point of fact, while this is a murder mystery, it's actually really an art mystery. And, I couldn't help but think about Daniel Silva's new book, Portrait of an Unknown Woman when I'm reading this because there are elements in common.
I haven't read that.
Well, you should.
Okay.
You'll like it a lot. But he went from spying, he retired Gabriel
Okay.
from the head of the Israeli and moved him back to Venice to be an art restorer. And then he has to delve into art fraud, art, whatever it all is.
Okay.
So I think that people who might not care anything about occupied Paris and all the rest of it, many people will be really interested in the Louvre, its attempt to save its treasures, the role of Pablo Picasso. Is that real, by the way?
Well,
Or you just kind of
maybe exaggerated.
sort of made it up, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, so you have a chance to be, because there were artists and other creative people who stayed in Paris too, or stayed, actually more of them stayed down on the Riviera. Isn't that where Chagall and all those guys hung out?
Yeah, and Picasso was down there too.
He was. He went all around, but he was Spanish, so even if he was in Paris,
Right.
he wasn't actually French. And Spain was a neutral country, and that might have given him a little extra play.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, honestly, that's one of the things where if someone wants to dig in deep into history, they can send me an email about Picasso wasn't there on that day or whatever. But I'm not going to worry about that.
No, just ignore that.
Yeah, exactly. But the art stuff, what was interesting to me in doing the reading was, and I don't know why this hadn't occurred to me, maybe because I just never thought about it, but just the blatant theft.
You didn't see The Monument Men?
Just no.
Oh, come on, Mark.
No. It was.
Have you watched The Monument Men? It's an entire movie with George Clooney about when the city is the American attempt to retrieve as much as possible of all the stolen art from the Nazis as the Russians are moving right towards them and trying to get away from. But I mean, it's a very well known.
Okay.
And you know, the recovery's still going on. If you read the Klimt, you know, the Woman in Gold, the movie with Helen Mirren, which is absolutely terrific about the family still trying, you know, and eventually succeeded in regaining title to the Klimt, which is now hanging, thanks to the Helena Rubinstein fortune guy whose name is I'm blanking on. It's now hanging up on Fifth Avenue. Is it the Cooper? Not the Cooper. Thank you. The New Gallery, N-E-U-E, right, where I've been to see it many times. But some Klimts are also in Vienna. And there's a, at the, thank you, because my mind is just not in for names. I appreciate that. At the Belvedere. So we went to visit the Klimts in the Belvedere and then I've been to the New Gallery 2 or 3 times to admire the Klimts. But The Woman in Gold, which was the subject of all of this, a great book and a really great movie. Recently, yeah. His father had been the guy that, you know, the Nazi that had acquired it all.
But that's the thing. Everybody was just helping themselves.
Yeah. We'll never really know how many. I mean, you know, forever you heard about the Russians heisting all these Impressionists and taking them off and hiding them, you know, in the basement of the Hermitage. Well, my husband and I, a few years ago, went to obviously before the recent developments, went to St. Petersburg for a week as a friend of the Hermitage. It was an organized group. I think there were 10 or 12 of us. Anyway, they had put the Impressionists out. And I'm here to tell you, it was a really crappy bunch of Impressionist paintings. I mean, it wasn't anything wonderful. They got some, but they certainly didn't get the cream.
But a lot of people doing the stealing weren't art experts, right? They were just, this is here, I'm going to take it.
Right. And, you know, I mean, Goering and the salt mines and all. And it's interesting, the strategies. For example, the British National Gallery sent its art treasures to Wales, to the mines in Wales, and distributed some of it in country houses. But most of it went to Wales on the theory that, you know, it would be safe there.
No one cares about Wales, so.
It's too far from London.
Sorry,
you know, it might be 100 miles to, you know, whatever. You Brits think in different geographical terms.
That's true.
We do.
Yeah, it's a long way for that.
But In All the Light You Cannot See, which was, you know, that monster bestseller, it was about the Louvre and it relocating a lot of what it had to Saint-Malo. And what went on there. So those big museums were thinking very, very strongly about how to hide their treasures. And of course, the Louvre had that whole disaster with the Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
And, you know, what's his name? Jonathan Sandlofer, a friend I've known for years, an artist in New York, wrote a big book last year about with the idea that even though they recovered, they think, the Mona Lisa from under the bed of the guy that worked in the Louvre that heisted it, it's not
It's a
100%
fake.
sure that it's not, not a fake. Which is really what Daniel Silverberg is writing about. Is there are probably paintings and other art in museums all over the world that may not be authentic, but it's just going to be too hard to work all of it
Right.
out. But the Nazis upped all of that to some phenomenal extent.
Yep.
And in fact, the monument men in the very last scene, one of them, I think I have this right, goes to get a known Nazi in his own home in some like rural part of Germany, right? And on the wall, just like, anybody would have the watercolor painted by his wife, were two of these amazing, amazing paintings. So they're going to keep turning up. They really will.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, so Henri is very caught up because one of the guy that's murdered, doesn't he, or a guy that's murdered actually works at the Louvre.
Yeah, he was one of the guys who was
Security or whatever at the Louvre?
no, he was one of the ones sort of sorting out which stuff which Germans are taking and
that's
which
right,
stuff
right.
they're not.
And lying his head off as he did it.
Yes, helping himself here and there, which is how I gather it happened. And obviously, you're a German in uniform in the Louvre, stealing for the Germans, stealing for yourself.
Right.
There's a lot of people want to kill you, or a lot of potential suspects.
And that was the flaw in the Nazi scheme, was that they just sort of assumed with rigid discipline that anything that was stolen from the Louvre would go to Hermann Goering's collection,
Yeah.
or Hitler's in the salt mine or something. But they forgot to realize that people could just help themselves.
People were just skimming bits.
As they went along.
And I wonder if all the crap ended up at Goering's place. I don't know. I mean, people. Well, probably not, because people didn't know what they were stealing. But yeah, it was a war, but it was a grift and graft.
It was a grift.
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah.
Well, if you read about the Vietnam War, you learn that that's where the serious dope trade started.
Yeah.
So war is an opportunity for grift, as you say. The money in Iraq and Afghanistan, unbelievable amounts of money that just went missing.
And people paying attention to other things. I mean, most Parisians were not, let's go to the Louvre and look at the nice. They were trying to find bread, or
were they even allowed in?
No,
Wasn't
that
the
period
Louvre
they were
closed?
not. Yeah, I have it in the period that it was closed.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, they opened it up later.
Why? To sort of raise morale among the French citizens?
Yeah, the same reason they opened up the theaters and the cinemas, but obviously very carefully controlled what could be viewed. And the second in the series opens with Henri going to the movie theater, to just get a break and see something. And of course, the first thing he sees is this German propaganda film that starts, and he sets him off. And but yeah, that's I'm trying to inch forward. I'm aware that the Second World War only lasted a certain amount of time.
Here's the great thing about writing historical fiction. It's already aged. So you could start your second book the day after this book ends and keep going that way. I've had a lot of conversations with authors about that. Historical fiction doesn't need to be written in real time, because it isn't. And if you've got a relatively short target, like the 30s before the war, which is Jackie wins. Well, no, Jackie moved on it, but Rhys Bowen and I were talking about that. Lady Georgie, she doesn't think will play well during the war. So she's going to inch her way, towards the war.
Right.
Right. And there are people who write like Edwardian series, but 1914 is just ticking out there.
Yeah.
And if you advance too quickly towards it, your everything you were writing about will go up in smoke.
Yeah. So this is July, and the new book is December. So it's just a few months, and then I might have to slow it down a bit, just in case. I don't want to run out of a Second World War.
You could just move to January. Right? No, I mean, seriously.
Yeah, no, I could.
I think that readers are perfectly happy. Lindsay Davis, when she started the Falco Roman series, her second book started the morning after the first book ended. Why not?
Yeah. I mean, Philip K. bounced around all over the place.
Well, yeah, his solution to that was to ignore, timelines.
Yeah, and there were websites devoted to inconsistencies because of that. He didn't care.
No.
And that's, there's no reason why, if this series continues, it can't go beyond the war,
Well, you
back
can.
to pre-war.
Sure. Well, Philip was dealing to some degree with what we're just talking about, which is how can you be a good policeman, in wartime situations, and what are the ethics, what are the practicalities, how much can Bernie actually function
Yeah.
as a cop? Actually, in many ways, my favorite was the one he said on the Riviera in 1956 with Somerset Maugham. Remember?
Yeah.
It was all about bridge, which I happen to be a tournament bridge player. So I used to be anyway,
Yeah.
at a very high level. So I really enjoyed the bridge. I critiqued his bridge hands.
I'm sure I enjoyed that.
I did. but I liked it because the war was all over, and this was Bernie in the aftermath. And the other person who wrote a brilliant book about that is Joseph Cannon in Istanbul Passage, because he has people, on the job in Istanbul, and then the war stops. And what are they to do? They no longer have the mission. What kind of lives are they going to pick up? What in their previous lives has been destroyed? Where do they want to be? There was a huge amount of confusion and people moving about and all in the years after the war, because people either were repatriating or decided not to repatriate, and who was paying them for whatever they were doing, and what kind of work were they going to do, and who took their job while they were gone, and just goes on and on.
That's the thing about those wars. That's why I was able to slip it into some of my contemporary books. It's just the ripple effects. Just
displacement is horrendous.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And one of the things I was thinking about that occurred to me, kind of non-stop as a theme, writing Henri as a policeman, is there's this death and mayhem all over the world, people dying, step out of the trench, get a bullet in the head, that's you gone forever, family destroyed. Somebody gets murdered in Paris, who cares? Like, why do we care? Like, one person? Thousands are dying all over the country, all over Europe. Like, why doesn't he just put down his pencil and be like, oh, it's just one more? And that, again, that's something, having not written historical fiction, especially in that period, it's a philosophical question I had not really
It's an ethical question.
Well, yeah.
As well.
Yeah, as
Big
well. Very
ethical
much so.
question.
And
what's the point of being a policeman if you're not going to enforce, if you're not going to respect the rule of law and enforce it?
Yeah. Which is kind of the side he takes, which is, look, I'm just one person. This is my job.
Mm-hmm.
What use am I if I'm not doing my job? You may think human life is worth less now, but this is still my job, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it well.
Well, you have to decide, human life in the particular in an individual is a different choice than, a whole battalion of people. There are lots of conversations about thrillers don't really work if you can't take some massive event and bring it down to a personal story, because it's just too hard to.
A huge body count in a book is, in the end, it becomes like, somebody else is dead.
It becomes statistics rather than humans.
Yeah.
Yep.
But, in a mystery, there's also the element of the challenge, the solving of it, right? It's almost like he's been personally challenged. And he has been personally challenged, actually, in this book, because he's given a period of time to solve it, or his neck is on the line. And so I guess that's external motivation. But he has the internal too, which is to be like, he's given a list of suspects by the Germans. And he's like, well, I'll look at these, but that's not all I'm going to do. So there's an internal force propelling him to do his job the way he thinks it should be done.
So we've talked about Henri and we've talked about Princess Marie. Are there any other characters that you really enjoyed writing and are carrying forward?
Yes. We'll call her roommate, Nicola, somebody who lives in the same apartment as Henri. There's more to it than that, obviously. And this is, on a personal level, this is amusing to me because I have 3 children, twins and a younger daughter. My son and my younger daughter butt heads constantly. They're that age. And his name is Henry, and her name is Nicola. And so I have them living in an apartment together in Paris, where they have to get along. So I find that highly amusing.
Wow, sounds like wish fulfillment. But
Yeah, I think it's one of those things when they're older, they'll be very good friends.
yeah.
Do your kids know this?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. Torture them with it whenever I can. But she's sort of the other strong woman in his life
Yeah.
who doesn't put up with his nonsense, who hides his secret with him, shares them, but also pushes him to get over them. She's really the biggest ally for Princess Marie Bonaparte, who's known as Mimi. And I like her. She's going to stay. And
Is there someone down at the cop shop?
there is a character who you may not, well, you probably will notice him because for the same reason that Henri noticed him, and that is he was doing his job guarding, but he was reading a book. And the readers, I think they'll be like, oh, I think I might like this character. And that was the same response that Henri had. And he becomes a much more significant character in the second book. Yeah.
Well, it's wonderful when you write a series. You sort of pick up new characters, and then readers like them or you like them, and they kind of stick around.
I wanted a love interest for Nicola, and I thought the fictional one, in case you're watching, darling, too young. So I thought I like that guy.
Mm-hmm.
Let's bring him back. And so,
well, Hugo has an ongoing and interesting relationship, so it's kind of what you're used to writing.
Yeah. And oddly, I haven't thought of one for Henri so much. I think in that book, because he's so secretive, and you can't really have that big of a secret and a very serious relationship. I don't think.
Good point. All founded on lies.
Yeah.
Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, either you lie forever or you tell, and he's not prepared to do either one. He does come across somebody in the second book who, again, doing research for this stuff is incredible. You find these stories of real people. I'm sure you've heard of the book A Woman of No Importance. Yeah. Have you guys heard of that? So this Virginia Hall, she was an American.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, personality-wise, a lot like Mimi, I think. Very strong, very independent, from money. She kept trying to join the civil service in America because she was a woman. They wouldn't let her. They kept like stringing her along, and she ended up. Well, first thing she did, she went hunting and shot her own foot off, and so she ended up with like a wooden leg from here down, and then ended up being one of the chief spies in France, where the Germans like had desperate to catch her. In fact, at one point they were closing in on her, and she had to escape on foot, singular, obviously, across the Pyrenees, walking. She eventually got to England, and then I think parachuted back into, or came by boat, whichever it was, back to spy for the English. How have I lived this many years and never heard of this incredible human being? And so when I read that book, I'm like, she is making an appearance.
Excellent. You know that there's a new biography about Josephine Baker, who's American.
Yeah, I did hear about that.
Wonderful, black performer, because the French welcomed them when Americans didn't. A case made that she was a very active spy.
Yeah.
During the war, she lived on the River Vézère. She has a chateau, which I've been to see. And Martin, has written about her because that's where his books take place. But, there are endless stories that keep emerging about the war. And right now, there's a huge premium on women's stories.
Yeah.
Not military fiction like Alistair MacLean and the Guns of Navarone or something, but stories where women did perhaps less immediately bravado sorts of things, but, kept things going, ran libraries, did undercover work, did all kinds of
Paris
amazing
Library,
stuff.
the Paris Library by
Janice, Kiesland Charles, right. Did a wonderful conversation with her last year, and the part I love is that both Janice and the character in that book end up in Montana. I mean, the nexus between Paris and Montana hadn't really
It's not
occurred to
necessarily
me.
not obvious.
No, not a bit obvious. So amazing. Mark Sullivan has written two astonishing books about men who were, one starts in the Ukraine, and the other one is about the Italian from Milan who helped Germans,
Okay.
I mean, Jews escape
Yeah.
across the Dolomites
Well, I
into
mean,
Switzerland.
think about everybody in Europe was touched by that war, and millions in America. That's how many stories there are.
Yeah.
Some of them are mundane and not interesting.
Few of them really, I mean, Kristen Hanna really kind of got it going with the Nightingale, I think, but now, you're just deluged every month. In fact, it's getting to the point where I'm not really diving into them because I've read so many of them, I sort of, feel like I need a break.
Yeah.
But there's an overwhelming subgenre now of World War II women's stories, just huge.
Did this happen with World War One?
No,
There's not-
World War I is like the most depressing war to write about. Ken Follett had it totally right. When I met him in New York, and he gave a talk to the thriller writers, and he said that the reason there's so many books about World War II is the only war in history where there was clearly a right and a wrong side. It was, there was really no question about who was right and who was wrong. And
Yeah.
even the losers have acknowledged it.
Yeah, that's true.
Today,
Yeah.
and so it makes it easier. But World War I is all shades of gray and incompetence. It's a war that should never have happened, and it should have been negotiated out.
Yeah, because
very
even the
soon.
good guys were just terrible people.
And the generalship was awful, and Churchill was blamed for the Dardanelles crisis, and it was actually his idea was a great one, but the execution of it,
Yeah.
the general in charge was an idiot, and so
All those generals were idiots. I mean,
mostly they were not
yeah.
trained in the but they were also not trained for the kind of warfare that, it was too rapid a transition to 20th century warfare
They fought the old
for
way.
people who
Fought the
were
old way,
trained
yeah.
in the 19th century. I mean, what's his name, from our, I can't even, Pershing, took cavalry to World War I, riding horses into the face of cannons. But they just, didn't, and you don't get to be a general at 20, very rarely. So, mostly they were old school guys.
Right. And the solution was, the horses are being shot, more horses.
Exactly. PK, are you lurking back there with questions from the audience?
I do. I've got a question all the way from Italy, Stefania.
It's Stefania.
It's our good friend Stefania. She wants to know if Mark thinks World War II could be a way, writing about World War II could still be a way to remind people about something that we shouldn't forget or forgive. Are you looking to teach younger people about that terrible period?
Teach is a difficult word.
How about illustrate?
Yeah, I think illustrate, and I think not necessarily in a these are the good guys, these are the bad guys way, but more in a way of these are the things people had to do to survive. This is what life was like. I mean, my kids could not imagine the starvation, the privations that the people had to go through just to get a loaf of bread or a meal. So I think that's a great question, because I think it is a really good way for younger people and even people of my generation who didn't live through it, and it's a memory brought through grandparents, I suppose.
Well, Stefania is in Italy, who stays up to absurd late hours, Stefania, to watch these programs
Time is it?
live.
Well,
Jeez.
thank you, there. Well done. Thank you.
But I feel sure that there's a personal context, for that kind of a question that we wouldn't have, because, there she is. Thank you very much, Stefania. We really appreciate you always ask absolutely wonderful questions. Anybody else?
She actually also wanted to know if there were any topics too delicate or dangerous to write about.
Killing dogs.
Oh, we
For
mentioned
one.
that. Does she mean in the context of the war?
I think in general, yeah. I think in general the war, but also in your own writing outside of your historical fiction, like within your bookseller series and etc.
No, I don't think there are any subjects that I wouldn't write about. I think you have to be careful within a series to stay within certain expectations. My Hugo Marston series is very traditional. You wouldn't expect massive gore or anything too horrific in it. compared to the two books featuring Dominic, who is a horrible, horrible human being. And it's so you can't. There's nothing, generally speaking, you can't write about. But you just have to be careful not to mix like genres or tableaus.
You want to meet your readers' expectations once you create them.
Yeah, and
Wasn't
I
that
think
well put?
that was very well put.
Thank you.
Just ask her the questions from now on.
So, in your personal life, Linda from Linda Schmazel would like to know what's more difficult, being a prosecutor or a defense attorney?
Boy, she's right there from the beginning. Thank
Wow,
you, Linda,
more
paying attention.
difficult. Yeah, we have a criminal defense attorney in the audience, former one, retired sensibly. I don't know. It's just very different. It's two sides of the same coin, but it's a different skill set. It really is opposite. I don't think one's harder than the other. I think each one has. I like as a defense attorney, I'm starting to enjoy the fact that I can ignore some rules.
Well, it's a little freer flowing.
It's
and,
much, yeah, it's
and as a
great.
person who actually learned the law by reading it back in the state of Virginia, what I learned from that, because I got to sit in on, I did all this public defender work because there wasn't any money in it, and I
Right.
was allowed to work with lawyers and try and work on cases because, I was A, free, and B, studying. But what I really learned from it is he who tells the best story wins in court.
Well, yes, I think
It's
that's
harder
true.
today
I think that's
than
true.
it was. With forensic evidence is more compelling, but nonetheless, it's amazing how you can get juries to actually overlook facts and go for,
Part
the
of
best
that
story.
Yeah, part of that is muddling up. So I had my first ever jury trial a couple of weeks ago, as a criminal defense attorney in rural Texas, small town, and I really enjoyed the ability to object and muddle up the prosecution story with no consequences. There are no real rules for defense attorneys. You can be obnoxious. I wasn't, but you could be. Whereas a prosecutor has to follow these certain steps. They have to be good and they have to toe the line, because if they screw up the case, then they get in trouble and they lose their jobs. Whereas what we're
Or
trying to
they
do,
also subject to appeal if they really screwed up the case.
exactly, yeah,
Right.
and that's terrible. That's
Yeah.
if I do something that's beyond the boundaries and I get a not guilty, there's no appeal from that. I win still. So there's the word cheating comes to mind. It's not that. I wouldn't lie. I wouldn't be
You have
deceitful.
a freer range.
Yeah, much freer reign, which is nice. And I also really like helping people. When somebody phones us needing representation, very often it's for the first time. They're terrified. They're all they can see in their future is prison. And by the end of the phone call, I've basically told them it's going to be okay.
Did you read the story today in the Republic about the photographer who, it's a fascinating story. He got arrested for climbing up on top of something to take a shot. Anyway, he was pursued by jurisdictions all around the United States, and he was so broke, he couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't raise bail. It was just horrible.
Wow.
But his photographs began to be, what are they called, NTFs? Isn't that what they are? Okay.
Oh, really?
So his photographs gradually got entered into NTFs, and by the time he was a year into this saga, he's become a millionaire. And he has now devoted money to working on bail reform.
Yeah.
There's an organization and so forth for people who, some of them are so poor they have to choose between making bail and hiring an attorney. And so they just got lost in the system. It's really hard for them.
Yeah, that's getting, in my jurisdiction anyway, that's getting a lot better. People are recognizing that people are being held in jail purely because they're poor. Whereas somebody in the exact same position who has a couple $1,000s, 10,000, whatever it is, can get out. So
Here's a title for a book. Get arrested, get poor, get rich, get even.
Yeah, there you go.
Which I thought was, it's a great article.
Yeah. No.
Anybody here have questions that they would like to ask? No, you're all mesmerized by all this, right?
The one that comes to mind, I think is Hugo going to continue on?
That is a question I do get asked quite often.
Especially by me.
Yes.
Because I like Hugo.
We'll talk.
Yes, I like Hugo too.
But But it's hard for Mark to have a full-time job and write these books and
Yeah.
also make room for Hugo.
My partners told me that I would be working less than I did at the DA's office. That turned out to be a lie. So, but that said, I'm certainly not done with
Closing
it.
the door on
I'm not closing that door at all.
If this series done well, one strategy is when he signs a new contract to insist that one of the books be a Hugo. I know how to do this.
Yeah.
I paid a lot of attention to contract law.
My other agent here.
I didn't know
Right.
anything about your background until tonight, so I didn't know you had a day job.
Well, you know what? If you don't mind buying, 200,000-300,000 copies of this, I won't have to.
Right. He's okay. I was so good at my job that I retired at 50, and this is a not-for-profit bookstore. So,
Well, we're
it's,
hoping you not make a profit.
no, I want to make a profit for the staff. I don't get paid is what a not-for-profit, the owner does not get paid. So all of the money in this bookstore goes to the staff.
Yeah.
But I was fortunate. So there we are. Isn't that right, PK? Your principal salary is all because I don't have one.
Absolutely.
Right.
100%.
And what's a really nice thing is that John was not paying attention because we have a donation button, and he'd forgotten to notice that he was getting these various PayPal donations, and finally some woman who very kindly sent us a very large check wrote to say that she thought the least we could have done was thank her. And so I went, oh my God. So no, seriously. So I spent like 2.5 hours this afternoon retrieving all of this and writing to people, and I got back the nicest letters. One was a friend of my mother's who, my mother's been dead for quite a while now, but used to have lunch with her at the country club, and she can't read now, but she, really wants the store to succeed. And, so she sent a check, and one was from one of our best customers who said, we've been her local bookstore forever, even though she doesn't live here, and she just,
that's
wants.
nice.
And, it was so nice reading all of these very kind notes.
Well, we've got great conversation going on Facebook between Stefania and a really nice person on Australia. So this is really kind of cool. You're just bringing the world together, Mark.
Okay, so it's morning in Australia. I know how to do this. I'm an expert at this. We are 15 hours and the next day from Australia, because I just did a double Australian event. So for this person's drinking coffee. And Stefania, we are either 9 or 10 hours. So at
It's like 3 in the
8
morning.
o'clock here, it's like 3 in the morning. So I conclude she's a night owl. And
Definitely
we have
night owl.
another customer in Romania who often appears.
Yeah.
So it's amazing to me how,
That is
how this works.
That's super cool. G'day.
Anyway, enjoy your conversation, everybody. And thank you both. Thank all of you, both the live audience and the virtual audience, for coming tonight. It's a very nice thing for Mark to have a chance to celebrate his first hardcover book.
Definitely. Thank you.
At
Thank
the
you for
start of
having
a series. We've been together all the way through, haven't we?
me. Yeah, absolutely.
We have, right? So
A decade.
Anyway, what a treat. So good night. Thank you for joining us. And round of applause.
Thank you.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.